if you didn't hear, OpenAI received a monster funding round. It was worth $122 billion, which brings their total valuation to $852 billion, currently generating $2 billion per month in revenue. What do you think about that one?
We often talk on this show about how AI hallucinates. Maybe here the investors and the stockholders are hallucinating a little bit, right? So in preparation for the IPO is probably what we're thinking about. So is the valuation a hallucination? I don't know. But they're probably going to have to sell about a quadrillion ads to ever reach that valuation. And I think this is part of something you're going to see in AI in general is massive valuations. At least AI, OpenAI is actually producing pretty healthy revenue. But the question is, what are the costs? I think all of these models, for every query, they're losing money. That's why they're pushing so hard for more compute power, right? More energy, et cetera, because it's going to require massive amount of energy, maybe to bring that, spread those costs out. Hopefully they can become profitable over time. Doesn't seem like having a free user base is a good way to do that right now because they're essentially just costs. So that's where you're seeing the ad pressure come in. And I imagine that's their board members, of course, putting pressure on their own executives, of course, putting pressure on to find new revenue sources, et cetera. So let's see. I just know at such valuations, it's very difficult to ever produce enough cash to justify that,
Yeah.
especially when you're losing market share
Well, it's going to be
in
one of the
enterprise.
highest IPOs ever, right? SpaceX probably the only one that's going to beat it ever.
Yeah. And who knows what's going to happen if what the messaging around it's going to be, what is the business model going to be? Because you have the free ads I just mentioned. You have OpenAI losing market share to Anthropic and enterprise. I think they were at like 48%. Now they're down to 27%. And with Anthropic, they went from third to first. I think they were, I forget what it was, like maybe 14%, then up to 40% market share. So does that mean enterprise is lost for OpenAI? I don't know. I know that at least this data, OpenAI may dispute and say they have a million plus whatever business consumers, but does that mean each user, or does it mean you have a million plus businesses, or what? Not ever clear, right? I get why they're disputing that, but it does seem there's a trend much more towards Anthropic and enterprise, and who knows what that means for OpenAI.
And I was just doing some math. At 852 valuation, it would take them 35 years at 2 billion a month of revenue to even hit that number. And that's just revenue. That's not profit. That's not net.
That's not cash,
That's
huh?
gross. They're going to have to find a way to make a lot of money quick. On that same note, and going into enterprise, Microsoft in this past week has now released its own in-house AI models covering transcription, voice, and image generation, presumably to reduce their dependence or exposure to OpenAI, because OpenAI right now is 100% behind Copilot. They're the brain behind Copilot. So, what do you think about that? I mean, that just makes it worse for OpenAI, doesn't it?
I'm not sure. I don't know if you saw the launch of Artemis this week, right? And it
Yeah,
turns out that their Outlook doesn't even work, right? They have
right.
two different versions of Outlook,
Yeah.
and neither one works. Let's see if Microsoft is able to deliver something that actually works
Well,
in that space. I mean, because if you're Microsoft strategically, you own enterprise channels, right? You have
oh
people
yeah,
locked in.
yeah.
And the question is, and I know I believe they're one of the bigger investors in OpenAI, right? I mean, we have to confirm how much. I think it was 10 billion that they put in. And that's where, as a company, you're treating them, because I used to run the corporate venture capital, you're treating OpenAI as an option. What I mean by an option is you put that 10 billion in to be seated at the table in case you want to acquire them later. But if they're going to go off and do their own IPO, they become competition almost immediately. And so that could be putting some pressure on Microsoft. And I guarantee you those numbers you saw with Anthropic, that's putting pressure on Microsoft too, because it's not exactly clear how Copilot is performing in enterprise. I put up a post earlier in the week on LinkedIn where the original consumer terms and conditions said it is for entertainment purposes only, Copilot,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, what kind of confidence does that give you if you're sitting in enterprise? Now, to be fair, those weren't the enterprise terms. But the question is, we did a little bit on how AI hallucinates and confabulates. I'm wondering how accurate that Copilot is sitting inside of enterprises. They're able to actually depend on it. And simultaneously, you hear about the Defense Department relying on Claude for, you know, pretty complicated missions.
Yeah.
So I
What
think that's a lot of the strategic stuff going on. You're just wondering, what is Microsoft doing? Are they even good at this? Or, you know,
they tried. So Microsoft did try originally to release their own models, and then they decided it would just be more effective to use OpenAI for now. So they've tried it before, and I guess it wasn't effective, or maybe they took the stance of Apple, who's kind of holding back and saying, "Well, let's just kind of see where things go for a minute," which I don't think that's. I think that kind of makes sense, honestly, with when you see how much capital
yeah,
is Apple's one
yeah.
of the. They're making great
Well,
numbers right now.
and I think this is always the question in strategy. You can do anything, but you shouldn't do everything,
Yeah,
right? And you have limited resources, limited capabilities. People said this is a mistake by Apple to not do a foundation model, right? Well, how many damn foundation models are there at this point?
yeah,
If you're Apple, you could just look at them as like, hey, look, I own the customers. I own the App Store, right? You're going to put your AI on my hardware eventually through phone or whatever,
hmm
or through APIs, people accessing it through APIs and apps. I'll just own that channel and just monetize you just like I always have. And
yeah,
I'm going to sit on that channel because I own the consumers, right? So they can kind of treat Gemini and the others as partners. You go deploy all that capital, right, to develop those models, and we'll just still charge you for using the channels.
yeah,
Like, we're not going to deploy all that cash because maybe they recognize that's not really their forte, right? That's not really their strength strategically. Their strength is brand, hardware, ecosystem,
yeah.
right? Closed system. And
Well,
they,
they dipped their toe in with Apple Intelligence, and I don't think they got very good good feedback. So
yeah, I mean, I know Siri's been getting hammered recently, but
yeah.
hey,
That takes us to a couple things here. So, Anthropic's leaked Claude code this week. It exposed internal detail about memory, permissions, tools, and orchestration. That was not intentional. I did catch some posts online that were clickbait and then saying, "Hey, I was the guy responsible for this leak," and he wasn't. It was just a guy trying to get some attention and pimp his own AI product. It was actually kind of ingenious, but super sleazy. Anyways, that's beside the point.
there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that around AI and on
Yeah,
X in general, just people trying to get attention because
yeah,
it's a status platform, right?
yeah,
At the end of the day,
absolutely.
zero sum.
They've also had an employee-funded PAC, a political action committee, formed. Typically, when those things are formed, they do things like polls, research, oppo research, investing, and political donations. So it's very much a arm of lobbying in a way, and it's the article I read on it said it was structured completely for the employees to be involved in the PAC. So not sure how it's going to play out, or if it's connected to this Department of Defense contract issue.
Well, I think Claude's penetration or Anthropic's penetration into enterprise began before that Department of Defense, and it's because Claude Code does such a
Yeah,
good job. It's getting better and better and better, right? I think
yeah,
everybody knows that.
yep,
Claude's reasoning is seen as top performance,
yeah,
the reasoning capabilities, and its adaptive abilities are seen as the best. I know when I was making my strategy model, right? We'll talk about that on a later show.
hmm
I noticed that it was better than ChatGPT at reasoning through this model that I created. So I just naturally went over there. And then when I saw Cloud Code, I just got hooked into the entire ecosystem. So I think they've done a really good job of building an ecosystem around the Anthropic API, Claude, their models, Opus, and Sonnet. Now, the second thing that could be interesting for enterprise, particularly in Europe, they have something called their constitution. So they're really trying to at least claim that they're more about safety and responsible AI.
hmm
And their claim was that the Department of Defense violated their constitution. You can fact check me on that. That's a branding move, isn't it?
yeah,
So
for sure.
they want to signal to their customers that they are consistent about their constitution. Now, others were claiming it was hypocrisy and all this. You can always find somebody on the other side. But what it looks like strategically is, yeah, you may have lost the Department of Defense, but maybe you're signaling to, European enterprise or whatever that you're taking that safety and AI and privacy and data very seriously because you're going to have to succeed in Europe.
I think at the end of the day, it's not going to matter a whole lot because I think everything's going to be open source. And I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical of all this big spending because of models. The Chinese models we've seen that have come out have been completely open source, accomplish things for a lot cheaper. I just don't think we know what the final vision is going to be yet. So I don't know.
Well,
I don't hate their stance. I think it's a good stance to have.
now,
But
yeah, one reason you might lobby, right, and I think we're already seeing hints of this, is to prevent those open models from competing against you,
true. Very true. Very true.
right? Because you have all the lawyers, you have the ears of the politicians, right? And you can spend the big bucks and write the laws. Now, people call that corruption, or is it just smart, right? To influence the laws, to lobby, so that it'll be cast, of course, as AI safety and make sure that data is protected and all this. But at the end of the day, those are regulatory costs for newcomers.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the open source models can compete. And in this case, if they're Chinese models, at least with the current administration, who knows about future ones, you could probably easily sell them on blocking those models for national security reasons, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the story is just there to be written.
Oh, for sure.
But it does bring up something because I know for our model, for example, when we're talking to venture capitalists, they're all concerned about being commoditized by Claude, right? Like, hey, when its reasoning capabilities get really good, your model's in trouble, right? And that's a fair assessment. But then you brought up something. Well, what happens when you have open source models competing against Claude and it gets good enough,
Yeah.
not perfect,
That's Microsoft play.
but
It's good enough.
yeah, it's good. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and you have the channels, right? But when it's good enough and it's open source for most people,
Yeah.
who knows if you're going to have the pricing power as Anthropic or OpenAI to justify those valuations and ever reach that revenue, right? I
Yeah.
mean, and that I think that gets us to one of our other stories out there, the release of Gemma, right?
Yeah.
By
Google.
Google.
Yep.
And what do you think about that? What do you think? I mean, we just talked about open source.
Yeah.
Maybe explain what Gemma is, and then I'll
Yeah.
give you my.
Gemma is just a Raspberry Pi compatible open source model, which means it can be deployed in very small instances. Now, the main competitor in this space is Meta, who's had Llama. Llama's been the number one open source large language model since the beginning almost. And it's been used exclusively amongst people trying to homebrew or startup companies, that kind of thing. It's been almost Llama completely. So now they're going to have a competitor. And I think that's great. I think that's fine. Everyone wants competition. Now, what does it mean, competition in the free space? I'm not exactly sure because, Google also has Gemini, which is a paid model. So,
All right, let me give you a take. I think probably the Chinese models you were mentioning was a
DeepSeek.
threat.
Yeah.
It's a threat
Yeah.
to the paid models, to Gemini 3, 4, when it comes, right? And then you have OpenAI, the latest one, I think it's 5.4, 5.5,
Yeah.
whatever. Then Opus 4.6. Those are expensive to run, and these Chinese models are starting to gain traction. They're getting good enough.
Makes
That's
sense.
the reality.
Yep.
I think it's like, I forget what the traction is. I don't want to make up numbers like AI does, but but if you're Google, you see that, and Google has its own ecosystem, right? It has Gemini, it has Google Cloud, it has Android, it has Pixel, it has all this stuff, right? What I think this is probably about, one is to stem the tide of those Chinese models by putting Google's brand name behind it.
Yeah.
But here's the other thing. If you start developing with Google stuff, and they do this as an open source, people are like, why would you do that? Do you know what a loss leader is?
No, explain.
A loss leader is something that you give away either at cost or at a loss so that you can generate revenue somewhere else. So
Yep.
one of the classic examples is like HP, the printers. The printers, you go in there and you're like, damn, this printer's like $30.
Yeah.
The cartridge is $50, right? Each time you replace, I don't know if those are numbers, but they give away that printer basically at cost so
Yeah.
they can generate all the revenue on the consumables. Now, if you relate that to Google, maybe they're giving away this open source model, Gemma 4, as a loss leader to create a funnel into Google Cloud
Yeah.
Android, and the rest, right? So it's a funnel into like this $17 billion business. And who knows how ads might relate to that. There's the language support in there. There's audio and visual in this Gemma 4, the ability to process that kind of stuff. That could be a game changer for certain people. It also means, well, if you're good enough, why do I need to constantly, if I'm building an application, why do I need to constantly pay Claude's and Anthropic's API costs when I can put just local model on at no cost essentially, right? I
Yeah.
have to train it maybe and host it somewhere,
Yeah.
but not it's not going to rack up the same bill as you are with Claude.
Yeah. One more quick one before we move on to our main topic. Oracle had mass layoffs this week, between 20,000 and 30,000 employees, via an unsympathetic, terse was the word that I actually read, terse email signed by Oracle leadership. Oracle stock has fallen 54% since its peak in September. So a little bit about Oracle, if you're not familiar with them, they build a lot of these data centers. So when NVIDIA goes to OpenAI and OpenAI goes to Oracle to build the data centers. So Oracle has a lot of data center builds ongoing right now that are unfunded. From what I've been reading, leading to this 54% decline is an indication, I think, in just uncertainty of the funding or an indicator of the AI bubble. And I think the bubble is going to burst at some point here. And I think Oracle's going to have to bear the brunt of that for a while. But, on in that same regard, their CEO is an Ellison, and he's got really good lobbying skills. So I have a feeling at the end of the day, they're going to be fine, but I think they will bear a brunt of the bubble because they're the company doing most of the infrastructure building here.
This is one of those courageous leadership emails where nobody is responsible for the email, but everybody's responsible,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
we're going to deliver bad news as a group, take accountability. Notice how the accountability only runs downwards,
Oh,
not
yeah.
upwards, right?
Always. Always does.
And if you caused your stock to drop 54%, now we know the market has a lot to do with that, the things going on in the world, of course. They can't control the speed of data centers. Maybe they run into some funding issues. Okay. But if you cause your stock to drop 54%, why are you not accountable for that? Why aren't
Right.
you going first?
No.
You know what I mean? I mean, that's how people below are getting let go. I guarantee you they're thinking that way. Why are you letting me go?
Yeah.
I'm doing actual work here. Where's the strategy here?
I do think this speaks to a larger trend that's going on in the market right now, and that is that a lot of these layoffs that we've seen a ton by every sector flagged as AI layoffs have been more in response possibly to tariffs, to bad market, uncertain conditions under this administration, stuff like that. So I do think that a lot of that plays in as well as just general economy, as not just maybe necessarily AI projects.
Let me give you the general incentive that you always have as an executive is to hit your annual EBIT target,
Yeah.
right? The fastest way to move that is just to cut headcount.
Yeah.
It's the easiest way.
Yeah.
Have I ever told you the story about the private equity company that took over Kraft Heinz?
I think so,
Well,
but say it again.
maybe it's in another video, but I think this is very similar context, right? So a lot of people are starting to look at these AI cuts as because they're trying to figure out is AI increasing productivity or are people just using it as an excuse to fire people,
Yeah.
right? Now, so your fastest way to hit your EBIT target, as I said, is to get rid of headcount. But there's a danger in this. And one of the most famous was, I think it was called 3G Capital, backed by Warren Buffett. They merged Kraft Heinz. And you know what PEs do, right? They come in and they basically cut costs everywhere. So that was the strategy here, was just to cut costs across the board. They cut their R&D to like half of the competition and then the marketing to like a third in a CPG game, right? Like in a game where branding matters a hell of a lot. So they did that, and then it led to bleeding, bleeding, bleeding. And this is the question. What headcount are you cutting? How does it relate to your business model? And a lot of times people cut things that actually matter a hell of a lot to their business model, but the bill comes due later,
Yeah. Yep.
sometimes after that leadership is gone already. So
Yeah.
they get their millions, then the bill comes due, stock starts to crash, then you have to fire even more people because you basically undercut the foundations of your business model. Now, that does not mean that corporate does not get too fat, right? There is a tendency in corporate to blow up headcount because headcount is a proxy for power and resources in corporations.
Yeah.
The more headcount you have, the more power you're going to get, the more status you get. Now, HR will tell you headcount doesn't matter, right? But everybody in every company in the world knows headcount matters. And every time you apply to a job, what is the first question you get? What is it? It's not, are you a good learner, right? It's not, are you, well, entrepreneurial, we can talk
What's
about
the largest
that.
headcount you've managed?
Exactly. That's it. That's all they want to know. Why do they want to know that? Because it's a proxy for your political skills.
Yeah.
Were you able to navigate, kiss ass properly and get up the chain and get enough people and power and resources?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you're actually talented at what you do. They never go ask that headcount if you're actually an effective leader.
For sure.
So, and then the other one I like to riff on is, I just said they ask if you're entrepreneurial, and my joke there is, well, yeah, first business idea you get, I'm out of here. They don't hire you.
No.
They don't want actual entrepreneurs.
That's
They
a,
want you to
that's a
pretend to
silly
be an
question.
entrepreneur.
It's a silly question
Yeah.
for an interview. Hey, you've just watched a clip from Show Your Priors podcast. We hope you liked it. Check out our main channel for full episodes. We're also anywhere podcasts are found. Give us a like, subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything, but helps us out a ton. We'll see you back next week.